Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 1. In this recording we are going to discuss about corporate finance and financial managers. So it's an introductory chapter. So let's start. So what does this chapter cover? So why do you have to study finance? What are the three types of firms, which is an important topic. So while reading through your books, focus on that, especially the taxation part, how different firms are taxed. It's an important one for the quizzes and the final exam. Then we'll discuss about financial managers. What is a financial manager? What does he do? What is its role? How is he placed in the corporate structure? What is a stock market? So it's an overview. We'll discuss more about stock markets throughout the course, but this would be a good overview. And finally, we'll talk about financial institutions and their place. So learning objectives that we are going to cover: the importance of financial information, why it is important both for your personal life as well as business lives, understand the important feature of three different types of firm, explain the goal of financial managers, his position, then understand how a corporation is managed, how it is structured, understand the importance of financial markets like stock markets and how they are useful to raise money, and finally discuss financial institutions. So why should you study finance? So this topic or this even course is extremely important in your journey as a financial manager. Corporate finance is where you make decisions. So what are the decisions? For example, let's say I am Elon Musk and I am running Tesla. So I would have a CFO who would aid me in financial decisions. So my new plan is to launch a Cybertruck. That CFO, that financial manager, would help me do a cost benefit analysis. What is the cost involved? What would be the research required? What would be the R&D? What would be the manufacturing setup required to manufacture a Cybertruck? And what are the potential benefits of a Cybertruck? How much demand is there? What are the competitors? And how much money can be generated? So it's always a decision between how much cost you have to incur versus how much benefit you get. And it's also applicable to your personal life. For example, let's say you decided to enroll in a university or in a college. So you had cost benefit analysis done for you. The cost would be your tuition fees and the time that you involve in, like in the college. The benefits would be maybe higher wages that you would receive versus what you would have got just out of an high school. So it's always cost benefit analysis, and financial manager's role is to do that. So financial manager plays a critical role inside any business enterprise. The potential decisions that the financial manager has to deal with: what products to launch, how to pay to develop these products, what profits to keep, and how to return those profits to investors. So let's take another example here. So let's take an example of Apple. It is rumored that they're coming up with an Apple Glass. So the potential launch date is around 2021 or 2022. It's probably 2022 because of COVID now. So what financial manager would make decisions regarding this? So he would decide how much money would be involved in research and development, in manufacturing, everything put together to create an Apple Glass product. Then, so what products to launch? Then how to pay for those products. So Apple has different options. Either it can use its own money or it can raise money from outside. So own money is whatever profits it has accumulated over the years, it can use that. Or outside money would be to take on loans or debt, or to raise money from the market, stock markets. So how to pay for development of Apple Glass? That is the second question. Third, he would also try to estimate what is the potential market size for Apple Glass as a product, which is very difficult to do. What kind of revenues would be generated, what kind of profits would be generated, and how much profits would the company retain, reinvest, as well as give it out. So it's a complex process. Financial manager does all of these with goals of maximizing the value of a firm. This is extremely important. The job of a financial manager is always to find out opportunities where benefits are higher than cost. That is how you add value to the firm. So example, if the potential benefits from an Apple glass is, let's say, over the period around $200 billion, and the cost to develop that product is around $10 billion, then that mismatch is adding value to firm. So why should you study finance? Individuals are taking charge of their personal finances with decisions such as when should you start saving, how much to save for retirement, whether a car loan or a lease is more advantageous. It again depends on the situation. We'll discuss this topic more in time value of money. Whether a particular stock is a good investment. So should you invest in Suncor with oil and gas going through its turmoil? So all these decisions are done by financial managers. Then how to evaluate the term of a house mortgage. So these are decisions that you would understand throughout this course in personal terms. And in your business or in your career, we'll be discussing how to decide whether to launch a new product for a firm, which suppliers should the firm choose, what are the costs, what are the benefits, should your firm produce a part of the product or outsource a production. So should you, let's say you're a Canadian firm, should you produce in Canada or should you ship it out overseas? Should your firm issue new stock or borrow money? There are benefits of raising money from stocks. There are benefits from raising money through debt. How can you raise money for your startup? So all these decisions you go through in your career. So that's why I'm again repeating, this is a very important course. It's a difficult one, no doubt about it, but this is very important because if you start your careers and if you ever move in middle or top management, these are the decisions you have to make. Point one. Second, if you ever go for your MBAs, the crux of MBA is corporate finance. All MBA schools focus a lot on this. So I would urge you to pay attention throughout the course. Now, there are different types of firm you can start with. For example, I have okay, so let me rephrase it. So there are different ways you can start your firm, like the company that you're going to start or the business that you're going to start. There are different ways to do it. So I'll take you through a journey of a friend of mine. I am also involved in some part of that business now. So the business is a hedge fund. He has started a hedge fund called as LH Holding, and it's a Calgary based business. So when he started LH Holdings, he was initially a sole proprietor. What is a sole proprietor? He was the only person who was managing that business. He was like the head of that business. One person, right? So one person run businesses are called as sole proprietorships. So they are businesses owned and run by one person. They're generally very small. So he was just managing his own money. He formed a company for that, and he was the head of, he formed a proprietorship for that, and he was the head of that. So very small, very few employees. They are very easy to set up. You can do it very easily, and it is very cost efficient to start a sole proprietorship. And many new businesses use this organizational form to start up. Principal limitation, this is extremely important, is that there is no separation between the firm and the owner. So for example, if my friend who heads LH Holding does something wrong or the business doesn't do well and he has a lot of debt, so those banks can also sue him for his personal assets. So he's personally liable for that business. There is no separation between business and a person. So if you are into a sole proprietorship and if you don't pay your bills in the business, your personal assets can also be impacted. So this is the first form. The owner also has unlimited personal liability for firm's debt. This is extremely important for your quizzes as well as your final exam. This is the biggest limitation of sole proprietorship. There is no separation between business and the person. So you're personally liable to all business decisions. The life of a sole proprietor is limited with the life of the owner. So if the owner passes away, the sole proprietorship closes down. It is difficult to transfer ownership of sole proprietorship because there is no mechanism for finding how much value does that person have. So it is very difficult to transfer it either in inheritance or to sell it. So it is little tedious. The second form is partnerships. So it is two or more people come together to start a business. Partnerships can be organized as general partnership or limited partnership. So while reading, focus on these terms, general partnership and limited partnership. General partnership is similar to sole proprietorship. So general partners are liable for business decisions. So if they take on debt, they don't pay their bills, their personal assets can be attached. So general partners are similar to sole proprietors. That is, there is no separation of business and person. Limited partners are different. Limited partners are only responsible for the money that they put in. So let's say my friend who has started LH Holding takes on few partners. He takes on a general partner who would help him with the management. So that general partner is equally liable in the business. And he also takes on a limited partner. So he takes on some money from outside. But that limited partner is not responsible for management. Then that limited partner has limited liability. Only $100,000 that he has put into the partnerships is at risk. Nothing else is at risk. Common features of all partnership is that income from proprietorship is taxed at personal level. So both for sole proprietorship as well as for partnerships, whatever the business earns, it will be taxed like your personal income. Income is split among partners according to their ownership in the business. General partnership, all general partners have unlimited liability. This is extremely important. So they're like sole proprietors, no separation of business and person. A lender can require any partner to repay all firms outstanding. The partnerships end on the death or withdrawal of a single partner. So if any partner dies in the partnership dissolves. They are personally liable for firm's debt obligation, and in unincorporated business owned and run by more than one owner is an example, have the same rights and privileges as partners in general partnership. Now this is a different form of partnership where you are only an investor, you are not the manager. So partnership with two kinds of owners, general partners and limited partners. General partners have same right and privileges like sole proprietors. Limited partners have limited liability. So this is important. Limited partners are only responsible for amount they put in. They are not responsible for anything more. A limited partner has no management authority. So they are not involved in management of the business. They are just passive investors. Limited liability partnership. This is a very famous form of partnerships that is formed in in Canada. And it is used for law and accounting firms in general. So a lot of law firms and accounting firms are formed as limited partnerships. Now, why is that? What is the reason behind it? Because when you are going to a lawyer or when you are going to an accounting firm in which the accounting people will either audit your firm or they would be responsible for managing your accounts, you need to know that if they make any mistakes, you can sue that person. So that person is liable for the decision the company makes. That is the reason to increase their sales or to have that proposition where they can say that I'm a law firm. If the lawyer makes any mistakes, you can have legal repercussions for that. That is the reason lawyers as well as law firms as well as accounting firms are formed as limited partnerships. It provides partial limitations of partners' liability in cases related to action of negligence or other partners or that are employees that are supervised by them. So what does it mean? Even though there is legal or liability, there is a legal liability. So if you make any mistakes as a partner, the investors or the employees can have legal consequences for you. Even though that is the case, there is a limited consequence. So you would only share the consequence if you are responsible or your subordinates are responsible. You will not be responsible for whatever the other partners does. So there is limitations. That is why it is called as limited liability partnerships. Now corporations. Now corporations are the most common form when the company gets bigger, because you cannot have partnerships or let's say sole proprietorships when you are of the size of Suncor or RBC or Apple or Tesla. When you get bigger, you generally start moving towards corporations. So corporation is a business form that is legally defined as an artificial being separate from its owners. So what does that mean is there is actual separation between owners and business, that is the company. So if you are an Apple owner, you can lose money whatever you have put in. So if I own, let's say, one share of Apple share after split is around $150. So I can lose that $150 if Apple does make some bad decisions, but I am not liable to more than that. So my liability is fixed how much ever I invest. It has many legal powers that people have. So it can get into a contract, it can have suppliers, it can negotiate, so it can own assets. So all these are rights that people have that corporations also have. A corporation is solely responsible for its own obligations. The investors or owners are not. The owners are not liable for any obligation or any decision that the corporation makes. So formation of corporation, it is generally provincial in Canada. So if you are in Ontario, you register with the provincial bodies there. If you are in Calgary, you register with the provincial bodies in Alberta. So they are defined under Provincial Business Corporation Act or the Canada Business Corporation Act. The articles of incorporation or corporate charter is the constitution of corporation. So what does it include? It gives out the rules. So what is the corporation made for? So if you look at Tesla, so Tesla's corporate motto is it is going to help the world towards sustainable energy. So that is its motto. So that becomes the motto. Then what are the rules that Tesla follows? So it would do this, this and this. It would not do this, this and this. So these are the bylaws. So every corporation will have a corporate charter that is generally created by lawyers, and you have to file it with the provincial bodies. Setting up a corporation is more costly than setting up a sole proprietorship, but there are distinct advantages. Ownership of a corporation, first of all, there is no limit on number of owners. So there could be millions of shareholders across the world for any company. So there is no limit on how many owners can a corporation have. The entire ownership stake of a corporation is divided into shares called as stock. So the more shares you own, the more part owner you are. So if example, I own 10% stock in Apple, I am 10% owner of Apple. The collection of all outstanding shares of a corporation is called as equity of an corporation. An owner of a share of stock in corporation is called as a shareholder, stockholder or equity holders. So what are the rights of owners? What are the rights of shareholders? You are entitled to voting if the share has voting rights, and you are entitled to dividends. So shareholders are entitled to dividend payment. What is a dividend payment? When company makes profits, out of those profits, some part it would like to share it with investors or owners, that is dividend. Usually receive a share of dividend payment that is proportional to amount of stock you own. There is no limitation on who can own a stock of a company. So for example, this is particularly related on and contrasting to partnership. So for example, if it is a law firm, then you have to be a lawyer to be a partner in a law firm. You cannot be an XYZ, you cannot be a computer scientist and be a partner in a law firm. But corporations do not have those limitations. So any person, irrespective of its knowledge level, irrespective of his skill, can be an owner in a company. So to become partners in Microsoft or to become owners of Microsoft, part owners or shareholders, you don't need to be a computer scientist. You can be, let's say, a school teacher or a nurse or anyone can own stocks. Key terms and definitions that would be important. What is a stock? It is ownership or equity of a corporation divided into shares. Equity, the collection of all outstanding shares of a corporation. Shareholders, also called as stockholders or equity holder, is the owner of the stock. Dividend payment, payment to the corporation's equity holder made at the discretion of board of directors. So let's see something. So let's understand it a bit practically. So let's open Apple and I'll explain some part from that. So Apple stock is around $134. After split, it was split 1:4. So it was divided into more stocks. So that's why the price has gone down, because more stocks were created. Now, a few things that are important, like dividend it pays is generally around $0.82 per share. So if you own one share, if you're a one share owner of Apple, you'll get $0.82, right? And last dividend was paid, or the last dividend date, that when the dividend was actually declared, was August 7, 2020. So dividend was paid 2 days after that. So in August, last dividend was paid, right? And market cap of Apple is around $2.3 trillion. So it is one of the most valuable companies on planet Earth right now. It is the biggest by market cap. It is even bigger than the economy of Canada. Canadian economy is around $2 trillion. So Apple's market cap or value of that firm is more than even Canadian economy. Okay, so let's go ahead. Tax implications of corporate entities. A corporation's profits are subject to taxation separate from its owner. So this is an extremely important topic when you read through your book, because this is covered in quiz 1 and this is also covered in the final exams. So you have to remember, how is the sole proprietorship taxed? So whoever is the owner, that income will be attributed to that owner and taxed at his rate. So if I am earning $100,000 from LH Holding, because I am a partner or a proprietor in that, then $100,000 would be taxed at my marginal rate, that is, let's say 34%. Same way partnerships. If the firm earns $100,000, there are two partners, each of them 50%, each one will get $50,000 and they would be taxed at their marginal rate. But corporations are different. Corporations will be taxed at corporate level. So there is a corporate taxation rate, right? So let's say Apple earns $1 billion in profits. So $1 billion Apple has to pay tax on that to the federal government, right? And then it pays out dividend from after tax. That dividend will also be taxed at individual end. So there is double taxation in corporations. So whenever you invest or whenever you become owners of a corporation or a corporate or a company, big company, small company in which the structure is corporation, you have to pay dual taxes. The corporation will be taxed, then whatever profit it shares will also be taxed at individual's rate. A corporation's profits are subject to taxation separate from its owner's tax obligation. Shareholders of a corporation pay taxes twice. So double taxation is there. The corporation pay taxes on its profit. The shareholder pay taxes on whatever they keep. But there are certain restrictions or certain exemptions that are given for income trust. So what is an income trust? Income trust is a special form of company in which the company distributes all its profits, does not retain anything. So till 2011, all income trusts had a pass-through status, so they were not taxed. But after 2011, business income trust have been started to tax, but REITs are still not taxed. Real estate trusts are not taxed. So once again, What is an income trust? Income trust is where the company, whatever profit it makes, it shares everything to shareholders, doesn't keep anything with itself. Okay. Now, till 2011, there are three forms of income trust. Business income trust, in which it runs a business. Energy trust, in which it runs energy related businesses, like it has mining, or it has oil and gas, or it is a real estate investment trust, in which it owns bunch of properties, commercial or residential, and generates income from that by renting or by selling. Now, all these three entities pass on all their income. They don't keep anything with themselves. They pass on everything to shareholders or owners. Now, if that is the case, then they enjoy pass-through status. That is, they are not taxed at the corporation level. They are only taxed at individual level. So, business income trust after 2011 do not enjoy this status anymore, but they used to. Energy trusts, they still do, and REITs also do. So REITs are very common. Energy trusts are not very common. They are very few and in between. So REITs is a very good investment too whenever you want to invest in a real estate. So if I own some units of REITs, I am an owner in a REIT. So whatever REIT makes, what does REIT do? Real estate investment trust. They create properties and rent them out, or they create properties and sell them out. So whatever it does, it makes money. That money, that rental income or that property revenue is completely transferred to me. They do not pay tax. REITs do not pay tax. But whatever income I get as an owner, I have to pay tax. So REITs continue to have no taxes as business level beyond 2011, but other form of income trusts are not taxed, are now taxed. So business income trusts are taxed. Energy trusts are not very common. So doesn't means it has stopped enjoying the status, but they are not very common anyways. But business income trusts are taxed now, but REITs still enjoy the pass-through status. So what is a flow-through entity? A business in which all income produced flows through the investor and no earnings are retained. So you need to be a flow-through entity to enjoy relief from double taxation. Income trust, a trust that holds income producing assets directly or holds all debt and equity securities of an income producing corporation within the trust. So they hold assets. Business income trust, an income trust that holds all debt and equity securities of a company. So they hold assets for a business and they run the business. Whatever income is generated, they pass it on to shareholders. Energy trust, an income trust that hold resource properties like mines or oil rigs directly or hold all debt and equity security of a company within the trust. Unit holders are owners of income trust. Now REITs is important for you because this is normally tested in the quizzes and final exams. An income trust that holds real estate properties directly or holds debt and equity of a company that owns real estate. So what is REITs? REIT is composed of commercial or residential properties either directly or through a company that is then in REITs. So these discussions are going to be important. So if you have read the book, I'm going to pause after reading the problem, and you should pause the video and then try to solve it on your own. Then I'll give you the solutions. So you're a shareholder in a company. Some of your shares are held inside your tax-free savings account. So if you're not clear with tax-free savings account, whatever shares you hold in tax-free savings account, you do not have to pay taxes on them. So dividends or interest in terms of bonds, dividends in terms of shares are not taxed in tax-free savings account. So any earnings that are not taxed, income from share held outside the TFSA is taxable. The company earns $5 per share before taxes. So what is happening? Some shares you hold it in TFSA, other shares you don't hold it in TFSA of a company that is making $5 per share in profits. After the company has paid tax, it will distribute the rest of its earning to you as dividend. The company's tax rate is 35% and your tax rate on dividend outside TFSA, because TFSA you don't have to pay taxes. is 24%. How much earning will remain after all taxes are paid? So just pause the video, try to do it, and then look at the solution. So how much is corporate earning? It is $5, and taxes on that will be 35% on $5. So how much would remain? So let's open an Excel to do it. Oh, they have done it. So I'll just cover it here. So $5 the company is earning, but it pays $35 tax. So $1.75 it pays in tax. So out of $5, $1.75 is gone to the federal government through taxation. Remaining is $3.25. Now that is paid as dividend. Now if you hold these shares in a tax-free savings account, the dividend you received, you don't have to pay tax. But if you hold them in a account that is not tax-free, then you have to pay taxes on that. So you will pay $3.25 into 24%. That was your taxation. That was your tax rate. So 0.78 you will pay tax. So 3.25 you got, 0.78 you paid as taxes. So left is 2.47. So out of the $5 that the company earns, you get to keep 2.47 after paying corporate and personal taxes. Shares within TFSA allows you to keep the entire 3.25. So only single taxation would work if a tax-free saving account is involved. Only the companies pay tax, you don't pay tax. So your tax rate is around 35%, that is the company tax rate. But if you own shares outside your TFSA, then the company pays tax as well as you pay tax. So your taxation tax rate becomes 50.6%. So almost 50% of the gains you are paying in taxes. Now this is important. If it is a REITs, what have we discussed with REITs? REITs are not taxed at corporate level. They are only taxed at personal level. So how does that change? So again, assume you hold some trust units in your TFSA and the other you hold it outside your TFSA. Your tax rate is 46%. So how will that work? For each unit within your TFSA, you pay 0 taxes. There is neither corporate tax nor personal tax if you hold it in TFSA. But if you hold it outside TFSA, there would be no corporate tax, but you still have to pay personal tax. So if you hold it in TFSA, you would pay 5 into 46%, that is your personal taxes. So 2.30 you will pay in taxes, so you will be left with 2.7. So even for your personal investments, REITs in your personal account, that is in your tax-free account, is an excellent investment idea because there is no corporate tax as well as there is no personal tax. But what happens if you actually own the properties? Like, this is off the topic, but if you compare REITs with normal owning, let's say I have an actual place that I rent. Whatever rental income I get, I have to pay taxes on that. So there is personal taxes involved because I cannot hold a residential place in my tax-free savings account. Okay, but I can own REITs in my tax-free savings account. So instead of buying a residential place, if I invest in REITs to get exposure to real estate, the advantage will be the REITs doesn't pay tax. Then whatever income I receive in my tax-free, I don't pay tax on that. So it is virtually tax-free at both levels. So this was the important topic. Go back again if you have not understood and go through the slides. We are also going to do few more problems in the class, so you will understand more then. The next topic is financial manager. Who is a financial manager? Financial manager in a company has 3 main tasks. Make investment decisions. So which products to launch, how much money would be required, make financing decisions. How will the money come? Where will the money come from? Right? Will it come from retained earnings, that is stored profits? Would it come from, let's say, debt, or would it come from equity? And he's also responsible for managing working capital, that is manage short-term cash needs. So day-to-day needs like paying electricity bills, paying then hydro bills, paying, let's say, employees, then paying suppliers. All these things are managed by a finance manager. You need to make certain that the money is there to pay it. Making investment decisions, the financial manager must weigh in the cost and the benefits for each investment. They must decide which investments or projects qualify as good use for stockholders' money. Making finance decisions, the financial manager must decide whether to raise money and from where. Should he raise from itself, like use retained profit, or should he or she raise from debt or equity? Managing short-term cash needs, the financial manager must ensure that firm has enough cash on hand to meet its obligation at each point of time. It is also known as managing working capital. So day-to-day needs. The goal of a financial manager, the overriding goal of firm's management is to maximize shareholders' wealth. Now this is extremely important and I'm going to discuss it at length. So what do you mean by maximizing the wealth of shareholders? So it means that share prices should appreciate. So people should find that company more valuable each year, each decade, going forth. So maximizing the wealth for shareholder is the objective of CEO as well as the finance manager. They try to do that. Now sometimes that conflicts, right? And there are different forms of ways to dealing with that conflict. So as a manager, I am only responsible to my shareholders. That is how the corporations are structured. My whole aim is to maximize profit for my shareholders. But I also have employees in my firm. I also have a society in which the firm works. So there is a possibility that maximizing wealth for shareholders is in conflict with my employees and it is in conflict with the society at large. For example, Amazon is famous for not paying much to its employees. It is almost like in United States, it is almost equal to its minimum wage. And a lot of states don't have minimum wage in United States. So the wages are very low if you're working in Amazon warehouses. But it is fulfilling its duty for maximizing shareholders' wealth, because when you pay employees less, your profits are more for shareholders. But is that right? So that's the whole dilemma. This is called as principal agent problem, or this is like corporate social responsibility, not principal agent problem, the corporate social responsibility, right? Sometimes this wealth maximizing thing is not beneficial to the society. Another example could be a chemical factory that produces harmful chemicals. Now, if it doesn't follow environmental norms, it can save up on its cost of production and generate more money for shareholders. But it is damaging the society in which it works. So is that fair? So there are different ways to deal with it, not covered in the book, but in Germany or in Japan, generally every company's board of director has representation from labor, that is the employees, as well as from the society, right? So that tries to mitigate this problem when you have the sole aim of maximizing shareholders' wealth. So corporate management team, stockholders of a corporation exercise their control by electing a board of directors. So how does the structure work? So like we have discussed, in a corporation, owners and the company are different. They're different legal entities. So shareholders are different, company is different. There is no intermixing. So shareholders own the company, but they do not run the company. So what do? Shareholders would hire board of directors. They would vote in board of directors who are responsible for the framework under which the company works. So all the big decisions are made by board of directors. Now board of directors generally meet quarterly, so they cannot have time to do day-to-day management of the company. So these board of directors will then hire management. So there are three levels. There are owners who own the company. There are board of directors who govern the company under a framework that is set by the shareholders. Then there is management that is hired by board of directors to run the company. Now, can all three be same? Can a person be manager as well as can sit on the board and be a shareholder? Most of the time it's yes, and especially with Canadian firms, it's yes. American firms are widely distributed. So generally there is separation between management and owners. So many companies, like after Steve Jobs, even Apple, the CEO is different, the board of directors is different, and the owners are different. Though CEO does own some stock, but he's not a major shareholder. One of the major shareholders in Apple right now is Warren Buffett, but he doesn't run the company. So there is distinctions. But for most Canadian companies, there is interlapping of roles. Like a CEO would also sit on the board, would also be a major shareholder. And that is okay. There is nothing wrong with it. You can have roles that are intertwined. Okay. So once again, three entities: shareholders, board of directors who are appointed by shareholders, voted by the shareholders, and board of directors to run the company have management. So stockholder of a company or a corporation exercise their control by electing board of directors. The board of directors make rules on how the company or corporation be run, set policies, monitors the performance of the company, and delegates most decisions that involve day-to-day running of company. The chief executive officer or CEO is the head of management, who is responsible for daily working of company. Under CEO, there are multiple things. There would be a CFO who is responsible for financing decisions. There will be a marketing guy. There would be, let's say, a production manufacturing guy. If it's a production company, there will be an IT guy, like the heads. Then there will be people under them. So it's a structure that is headed by Chief Operating Officer. Now this is an important topic. So there is a principal agent problem. So sometimes the management interest and the shareholder interest are not aligned. So management, let's say, wants short-term gains for the company. It is paid based on sales. So it would do anything to increase its sales, but at the cost of long-term, let's say, respect or customer satisfaction for the shareholders. So sometimes the shareholders and management's interests are not aligned. That is called as the principal agent problem, when management acts in its own interest and forgets about the shareholders. So when managers put their own self-interest ahead of the interest of the shareholder, that creates a principal agent problem. How to address it? Shareholders often tie the compensation of top managers to the corporation's profit or perhaps its stock price. This strategy also has some limitation. For example, if you look at Tesla, Elon Musk had a caveat. So if Tesla breaches such amount of sales or Tesla produces so many cars, he gets a big payout. So then he's incentivized to make more money for shareholders. He's not incentivized for short-term gains. So you can align the compensation as such that management and shareholders' interests are aligned. Ethics and incentives in corporation. Shareholders and manager are two stakeholders, but both include regular employees, customers, suppliers, and community. Japan and some European countries, stakeholder satisfaction view more highly regarded than the shareholder maximization view. So in Japan as well as in Germany, you have to satisfy everyone. You have to satisfy the shareholders, of course, but you also have to take care of the employees, and you also have to take care of the society in which you work. But for American and Canadian firms, the requirement is not there. So the only objective of an American firm is to maximize shareholders' wealth. But it has its pros and cons. Like the maximum wealth creation happens in United States because of that thing only. Because the whole focus is towards maximizing the share price. In many cases, actions that benefit other stakeholders and CSR initiatives may also benefit the firm's shareholder by creating a dedicated force, generating profits. So there are debates about it, because one of my friend who is a professor in University of Toronto, he did a research on this topic, like does CSR actually help shareholders? But it is not very promising. So though it is good, like paying your employees better, then doing ethically, business ethically, it's good, right? No doubts about it. But the research shows that these are not the companies that create maximum wealth for shareholders. If you look at, like, initially Microsoft, it had a lot of lawsuits for monopoly. It was not doing business ethically, but it has created tremendous amount of wealth for its shareholders. Same thing with Apple, it happened, right? Initially it was the case with Yahoo, because it tried to strangle Google when it was taking up. So there are debates about it. My personal opinion is, when everyone is happy, the world moves on and world is a better place, but the research doesn't show that. CEO's performance: when the stock performs poorly, the board of directors may react by replacing the CEO. A corporate raider may initiate a hostile takeover. So if if the stock is not performing, then the board generally changes the CEO, or there could be a takeover of the company if the stock goes too low. So key terms that we have come across: board of directors, it is a group of people elected by the shareholders who have the ultimate decision making authority in the company. Chief executive officer, the person charged with running the corporation by instituting the rules and policies set by the board of directors. Corporations can be private or public. A private corporation has limited number of owners and there are no organized markets for a share. So example of a private corporation is SpaceX. So Elon Musk owns 3 companies, or 4. He used to own the Boring company too, but he divested from it. But he currently owns and runs 3 companies. So Neuralink, then SpaceX and Tesla. So SpaceX is a privately owned company. It is not listed on stock exchanges. Tesla is a publicly owned company, so it is listed on stock exchanges. You can buy and sell stocks into that. A public corporation may have many owners and its shares trade on organized market called as stock exchange. So stock markets are divided into 2. Primary market, when the company raises stock for the first time. So a company is raising money directly from shareholders, that is primary market. Or secondary market, when the shares are traded on stock exchange between 2 investors. So whenever stocks are traded on secondary market, the company doesn't get any money. One shareholder is selling the share to another shareholder. But when company issues shares in primary market, it gets money from. So initial public offering or IPOs are done in primary market. In secondary market, 2 shareholders trade with each other. Markets such as TSX, NYSE and NASDAQ, where the share of corporations are traded without the involvement of the company. TSX is an electronic exchange, so investors generally post orders onto TSX from anywhere in the world. NYSE is one of the largest stock exchanges in the whole world. It has both active trading floor where traditional specialists trade, as well as the electronic trading floor. NYSE also has specialists or market makers who are given preferential access to orders but must stand ready to buy or sell at posted bid or ask price. So this is important. We'll discuss this. So whenever you trade stocks, you will have 2 things: bid and ask. Bid is the price that the buyer wants to buy at, right? Bid is the price that the buyer wants to buy at. So best way of showing you is to show you bid ask spread. So just bear with me. So let's look at Suncor. Now Suncor is listed on 2 exchanges. It is traded in Canada on TSX. It is also traded on New York Stock Exchange. So we'll see the Canadian one. Now if you see, whenever you open any stocks, you will see two prices, bid and ask. So bid price is $21.03. So the maximum price the buyer wants to pay right now for this stock is 21.03. There would be other prices, but they are less than this. So the best price the buyer wants to pay is 21.03. That is the bid price. The best price that the seller wants to pay or wants to sell at is ask price, that is 21.04. So bid price is the buyer price, best available buyer price. Ask price is the seller's price, the best available selling price, 21.04. Whenever these two price matches, the trade happens. Okay, and spread between them is ask minus bid. So bid ask spread is the transaction cost. So 21.04 minus 21.03 is the bid ask spread. This pays a very high dividend, 4%. Now with this stock, if I click on buy or sell, so let's click on buy, but I'm not going to buy this. I'm just going to show you how it works. Limit order and market order. So I have some funds available. I want to buy, let's say I want to buy one share of Suncor. I can either put market price. So whenever I put market price, it will take the best possible price that is there in the market. So if I'm buying, it will buy at ask price. If I'm selling, it will buy at bid price. So when I'm buying, it will take it from the seller at the ask price. If I'm selling, it will send it to buyer at the bid price. Or I could mention my own price. So let's say it is $21. I want to buy it at 19. So if I say 19 here and click on continue. So if this stock price, which is 21 right now, it ever reaches 19, then only the order gets executed. So there are two types of orders you can put on stocks, bid and ask. Okay. So limit order, two types of orders you can put on stocks, limit order and market order. So what is a limit order? Order to buy at a specified price. We were putting $19 as the specified price. So that's why it is a limit order. Until your order matches the price, so until the stock price goes to 19, no trade will take place. Your order will sit in the exchange. Market order, order to buy immediately because it automatically takes the best possible price. If you're buying, it will take the ask price. If you're selling, it will take the bid price. The bid ask price is the transaction cost that you pay along with brokerage. Now listing standards. Now to trade on TSX, NYSE, TSX Venture, all these exchanges, companies have to fulfill certain criteria. So these are the listing standards. These criteria are called as listing standards. They outline the requirement of a company that it must meet to trade on exchanges. NYSE's listing standards are much more stringent than TSX. So in fact, it's a pride for a company to be listed on TSX. Now, along with stock markets, there are other financial markets like bond markets, foreign exchange market, commodity markets, or derivative market. We'll discuss these markets in future throughout the course. Now, the last topic is financial institution. So what is a financial institution? It is an entity that provides financial services such as taking deposit, managing investment, brokering financial transactions, and making loans. So financial institutions can be an insurance company, a mutual fund company, a stock broking house, a bank, right? So all these are financial institutions. Now financial cycle is where money flows from those who have it to those who need it. So people invest and save their money, that is people who have money. Through loans or stock, the money flows to company who want that money to launch new products, generate profits, and money then flows back from those companies back to investors. So I'm an investor, I buy Apple stock. So I'm giving my money or I'm putting my money with Apple. Now Apple uses that money to create different products. Now out of those products, it will share some profits with me through dividend. So this is the financial cycle where money flows from those who have it to those who need it. Types of financial institutions: banks and credit union, insurance companies, mutual fund companies, pension funds, hedge funds, venture capital funds, private equity funds. So these are different. Banks and credit unions take deposit, gives out loans. Insurance companies take your premiums and pay out if a mishap happens. Mutual fund companies, they take money from you and manage your money. Pension funds do the same thing, take money from you and manage money for you. Hedge funds, they take money from wealthy individuals. So I am a partner in an hedge fund, LH Holding. So we take money from wealthy individuals and manage that money for based on small cap stocks. Venture capital funds, they generally fund startups. Private equity funds, they fund private companies. A financial institution or a financial service firm combines one or more types of work. For example, RBC also has an insurance wing, it has managing money mutual fund wing, it is a bank. Along with that, it provides other services too. Role of a financial institution is to move money from those who have it to those who need it. They also move it through time. So for example, if I want to buy a car, I can take a loan from a bank, so I get paid right now, which I then pay them back eventually in staggered amounts over time. It also helps to spread risk. For example, in insurance, you contribute premiums to get paid when something happens. So just go through these questions and try to remember the discussions that we had during those questions. In the class, we'll be discussing about chapter and problems. So I would strongly urge you to read the chapter before our class starts so that you are not sitting ducks and we can actually have productive discussions. Thank you.